Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Winvic and Partners Pavilion for this panel session this morning. I'm Tom Hankins, Operations Director for Winvic. It's our multi-room team that are hosting this panel discussion. So multi-room for us is anything BTR, the various offshoots linked to those, PBSAs, hotels. I just wanted to steal a moment, if I can, just to bring your attention back to the big bright pair of yellow wellies you might have seen on your way in. Where we're raising awareness for the Leeds Children's Charity and their work and project they're doing at Lynham Farm. So we'd encourage as many delegates as possible to join us in hopefully being successful and driving meaningful impact through the work they do with local children and improving their lives. If I get back to the panel then, we've got a fantastic panel put together this morning, building on the panel that we did 12 months ago that was really successful, where we challenged trust and collaboration. We've got a couple of familiar faces joining the panel, some of the same companies represented as well. So hopefully really good broad brush insight into what's going on in and around our sector, but also a really good barometer in terms of what has changed in the last 12 months. So if I hand you over to our chair, Nikki Kiriakou, and we'll get things started. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great pronunciation there. Thank you. Yes, I'm Sector Lead for Build to Rent and HBC. I'm delighted to be chairing this session from Alignment to Action, BTR 1 year on. We have a fantastic lineup, as we've said. 12 months ago, we began the conversation around collaboration and what needed to be done to ensure that we could all do better in this very taxing environment that we're facing. So now the question is, what has actually changed? Where has alignment driven real progress? Where do the barriers remain? And what do we do next? What examples do we have? We don't just want to be an echo chamber of what we know needs to be done, but how it's being done. So we have a tough backdrop. We've got a building safety regulator that is bedding in still. We have viability challenges that continue to affect our day-to-day lives, and a compliance environment that just keeps on giving, doesn't it? So we are very excited to have such a great panel line up, lots of people to get involved from across the spectrum. So please join me in welcoming Mark Jones from Winvic Construction, David Peacock from Heimstaden, Nick Keatley from Maber, Mark Woodrow from Package Living, and Kuli Bajwa from Pareto. So, to start us off, I would like each of you to just give us a quick intro, please, like 60 seconds each, on where you sit in this process and what you're finding in the market currently. So shall I start with Mark Jones?
Morning, everyone. Mark Jones. I'm Managing Director of Multiroom at Winvic Construction. We're a £1 billion turnover business focused on industrial logistics, multi-room, civils and infrastructure and data centres. I think as we've moved through the year, we've seen collaboration, which we'll talk about in a minute, but I think probably the arguments around viability, and this is why we're doing the early collaboration and early contractor involvement, is the key part that I've taken over the last 12 months since we did the panel last year. With our partners around the room, we're working on multiple jobs together, and I think you'll hear through the panel discussion today how we've tried to utilise our skills and knowledge to actually unlock viability in schemes over the last 12 months.
Thank you. Nick?
Nick Keatley. So I'm at Maber Architects, so one of the studio directors, architect, and also a accredited BRPD, and so I lead our building safety working group at Maber, which has been a bit of a steep learning curve over the last period. So I've been lucky to lead some of those projects to get through. I think we've got one of the first ones through Gateway for a new build, and just got some through on remediation as well now, which is good. So we've been through that journey, and we've been through that journey with some of the people sitting around the table today in terms of getting through that. So that's been our big challenge over the last 12 months, and it's still a challenge going forward for all of us, I think. So.
Absolutely. Thank you. Mark Woodrow?
Hello. Hi, everybody. Mark Woodrow. So I'm COO at Package Living. Package Living is a leading investor, developer and operator in the rental living space across the UK, with about 5,000 homes either built or in our pipeline. We're very much looking forward to delivering on all of the stuff that we're doing this year, and there's no doubt that investors and customers are still looking to get into this space and looking forward to discussing the challenges with the rest of the panel.
Thank you. David?
David Peacock, Director in the investment team at Heim Global Investor, which is part of the Heimstaden Group. Heimstaden is Europe's largest privately owned residential platform. We own, manage, operate 157,000 homes across 9 countries in Europe, all in a vertically integrated platform. We launched Heim Global Investor in 2023 and launched that with a residential fund. So we're coming into these developments as forward funders with a view to owning the completed developments long term and operating ourselves. Today, across our various portfolios, we're at 8,000 homes under management, but I guess most of this discussion will be focused around our residential development fund.
Thank you. And Kuli?
Yeah, so I'm Kuli Bajwa, founder and director of Pareto Projects. We are a delivery consultancy, project delivery partner. We work with various contractors, consultants, and clients. With employees, agents, roles, project management. Our expertise lies in delivering complex living sector schemes, mixed-use developments. We help our clients with program management, procurement, risk management, and delivery. We've been involved in a lot of higher-risk buildings, which I'm sure we'll come on today. And we've got a lot of experience in the living sector and build-to-rent, PBSA, and various other sectors as well.
Thank you very much. So to kick off, we're going to begin with the big question around viability. Have viability challenges eased, worsened, or simply shifted, and what has driven that change? And I'm going to start with David, please.
Good, nice light one to start. When I was thinking about answering this, I did think about how I'm not going to sound overly pessimistic. So I'm going to start with something that might sound a bit negative, but then try and finish it with something that's quite positive. I think that over the last 12 months, I think we probably, when we first started and we got into the office after New Year, I think we probably would have sat here hoping that it was going to be quite positive. It felt as though sentiment was a bit more in our favour. And then I think with everything that's happened since then, it's definitely got worse. I think viability is the thing that we wrestle with more than anything else. I think when you come onto these panels and you have these debates, a lot of people focus on a planning system that's kind of needs reforming, but I'm not sure that we necessarily agree with that. I think there are a lot of good schemes, brownfield sites in locations that we want to invest into, but viability is the thing that holds us back. We'll come on to the partnerships and how that solves it probably in one of the later questions, but I think it's a combination of construction cost inflation has probably been offset by rental growth. I think rental growth is probably just doing a bit better than where we were on construction cost inflation over the last, let's say, 2.5, 3 years. Financing rates are probably the big one that kind of catches us off guard pretty quickly, and you can't really ever model and forecast the kind of geopolitical shock, and that is felt in interest rates and the forward curve really quickly. So you can't ever try and create value quickly enough to catch up with that. And then I guess that the rental growth has been offset by an increase in exit yields. So you put all of those things together and it does make it a lot more difficult to deliver the schemes that we want to do. And I guess theoretically land value should be the thing that comes down to help offset that. But in reality, when we look at the size of the schemes that we're doing, land doesn't really, it doesn't account for a huge proportion of the total cost. So actually taking off 50% of the land value doesn't really help your total cost stack that much. So that's kind of the negative side, I would say. I think that the positive side is that there are a lot of government and public bodies that are quite alive to the fact now. And I think where we went to, if we were at MIPIM last year, everything we were talking about at MIPIM last year was about Gateway 2. This year it was about viability and how combined authorities and local authorities are helping, and Homes England are helping to facilitate delivery, and I imagine that's going to be the same over the course of the next couple of days as well. So I think that is a challenge. The appetite is there from funders and institutional investors to deliver more homes. We want to do it. It is hard. I think having teams with in-house residential experts helps because you can fine-tune operations, development, design, work with partners probably more hand in glove than what we ever have done. But I do think support from the public sector in trying to, it's a bit cliche, but that private sector, public sector partnerships really are the key probably to unlocking most schemes at the moment.
Thank you. Mark Woodrow, what would you add to that?
I agree with David. I agree with a lot of what he said. We're across the rental living sector, so we're in co-living in London. We're in single-family housing, one of the biggest operators in that market. So, but I'm going to generally concentrate on and answer the question from multi-family, flatted development in outside of London. I think you're right. I don't think it's about planning, and people talk about planning a lot. I don't think it's about planning. I think we can potentially, always takes it a bit longer than we wanted to, but we can generally get planning for what we would like to do. I think it's looking at the investment end and it's looking at the delivery end. So on the investment end, because base rates have moved, investors' requirements have moved. So risk and return has moved. So people who were looking for a 10, 12 return are now looking for a 15 above return, and that moves the dial for everyone involved in that delivery process. So I think that's very real. So we talk about there being a wall of capital ready to enter the living sector, and there used to be a lot of discussion about that. I think that's still true. I agree with David that that's still true, but it's looking for a slightly different return requirement, and so that puts additional challenges on the partners to deliver that. I think from a delivery end, not only have we been dealing with an inflationary shock a couple of years ago, and that's still, the uptick is still there, and it's not, we're not going to see falling construction costs, I don't think. But we've added to that through additional regulation and through not just in terms of building regulations, which we have, but also in terms of gateway, and that really hasn't helped. And that's a compounding nature of those things, partly through build costs, but actually partly through program and procurement and competition, which is maybe something stuff we'll come on and talk about a bit later on, and that hasn't helped from that side. So you've got a real squeeze from both ends, and I think that's seen a lot of schemes struggle. I think that's probably seen the amount of locations in the UK, and predominantly we're in England, one site in Wales, and I know the Scottish multifamily market, given some of the changes in the rental legislation there, has started to come alive. But generally across the home nations, probably the locations where you can deliver these schemes has got a bit smaller, it's got tighter, maybe prime cities are coming in a bit more rather than secondary cities, so it's become more difficult to deliver those things, despite exactly the same intentions and commitment from all those people.
I mean, from a contractor perspective, it must be extremely challenging right now. So Mark, from your perspective?
I will go positive at one point. Much like Mark and David said, cost inflation on construction has been an issue since hyperinflation a few years back in terms of Ukraine, and then we feel like we've made a step forward, and then we get into conflict in the Middle East. So, but I think with that, we have seen construction inflation balance out. I think my focus on here is engagement early on, that manages to actually set and lock in procurement early. So if we do get certainty on where the delivery and the design is, which we will come on to in a bit, but if we can then engage with the supply chain and hone down those costs, and then work with the supply chain and the manufacturers to actually say, well, you're locked in on this deal. That's where we can try and control the inflationary pressure. I agree that the viability is a struggle. Again, for us, it's that early engagement. We need to give these guys certainty, along with the design team, about where the design's going, give good cost and build advice in terms of when programs coming through, which does unlock appraisals at 50 basis points, because we can deliver a couple of months quicker just by virtue of changing something early on the design. And where we've seen more over this year is that really early involvement. For me, we're now involved in stuff pre-planning. I know planning, it hasn't really been as much of an issue, but where we saw stuff coming through planning that hadn't had the buildability element considered. We've got, and Nick will probably kick me here, but articulation on elevations and the wants of urban designers, but then the housing need of trying to deliver 1.5 million homes. Something has to give somewhere. We can have these greatly designed buildings, concept designs, get a planning ticket, but if government and that aren't actually seeing anything come through, what's the point?
Yeah.
We need to provide affordable homes.
Absolutely. Kelly, from your perspective, you're in the middle of it all. So how are you seeing projects being unlocked currently with all of this going on behind the background?
So things have changed since the regulations have changed in terms of the Building Safety Act coming into play. And as what Mark said earlier, we are starting to engage a lot more with the supply chain, with main contractors, and we're starting to stress test a lot of the design up front, which is allowing us to make more viable schemes and help schemes be unlocked by bringing in that supply chain and the contractors' input earlier, and the specialist consultants. We are looking at buildability, we are looking at program deliverability, and I think by combining all of that into the scheme very early on, whereas historically maybe that would come later on, that helps to unlock a scheme and make it more viable. And I think that's, that must be a good thing for investors, that they know what is being designed, it's being priced, that's reducing your risk, you're mitigating it from the outset. So when it does come out onto site, you're not having these issues with you having to change things when you're out on site. So I see that unlocking is happening by that early engagement piece.
So I guess it's coming back down to design again, right? So from your perspective, Nick, what are you finding? Because the biggest issue, isn't it, is about designing something that can in reality be delivered the way it needs to be, and that will function for X amount of years in the future. So you're having to marry up a lot of different things here, aren't you, in terms of what goes into the spec and how you get everybody on board with your vision?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so much easier when you've got everybody sitting around the table at the beginning of a project. I mean, that's what you need. Otherwise, you've got missing pieces of the jigsaw. I mean, the days of, some M&E performance spec and then we try and shoehorn it all in later, because they wouldn't be on board till stage 5. It just doesn't work. We've all been there and had the consequences, and you pay the price later. So, like I said, getting, everybody around the table at that early stage, it is pre-planning. I mean, one of the things we're talking to Mark is it's much earlier than planning. It's that early feasibility. You can give the spreadsheets to the clients about the net to gross and everything, but there's the metrics that somebody like Winvic would want to measure the building by as well, and inform that design, because there's no point us getting it to planning and then, Mark's favourite thing about, make the parapets higher or whatever it is, we've gone, hang on, we've got to go back to planning for that, because actually we think probably from the QS would say, oh, keep those down, and we go, but for Mark's part, that's a disadvantage. So actually we're just building in problems later on. So you might as well have all the issues on the table at the day one, because that's going to inform the viability, and there's no point, otherwise you're going to trip into the whole world of VE later on, and we know where that ends up, and it's going to end up compromising the design, and in whatever aspect that is, whether it's the performance wise of it, the appearance of it, and all those issues, and and then the buildings have got to be not just get designed and get constructed, they've got to perform and be managed. They're long-term assets for our clients. So the engagement with the management team, all of that feeds in. So we see it as great that everybody's around the table early on, because all those factors that will influence the design, not just the aesthetics of it, from that big architecture point of view, but all the practicalities are on the table, and you've got all the experts around, and it's getting the right people around the table. They're going to sort of come into that collaborative engagement. They, got the right behaviours and things. But, so we often do work with the same type of team on projects, because they're bringing the right mindset to the table, and I think that's the main thing.
Even if you're bringing everyone in earlier, given with the BSR being the way it is now, and everything has to be designed far more early, so the REBA stages are moving forward, right?
Yeah.
How much flex do you actually have, though, once you've locked in at the beginning? Do they allow for any flex, or is that it now?
Well, I mean, for Gateway, I mean, the key considerations there, if the things get locked in for the change control, is going to be, structural and fire issues, because that's what you'll, I was saying that, the BSR don't care about what your brick is, they're not bothered about that. They're not bothered about those issues. They're bothered about not colours you into this. There's where you've got to differentiate is what are the planning issues and what are the building regs issues.
Yeah.
And you've got to go with a different mindset about, don't lock into building regs that they don't need to know about, because it's nothing to do with them.
Interesting.
That'll be tie that in with the planners. If you're going to discuss materials, don't bother with them.
So be clever about it.
Well, yeah, just be focused that you're answering a particular question with Gateway, and I think you can fall into the trap of answering another question and giving them too much, which then you're tied into.
Got you.
So you don't need to give them. Be very clever what you give them. If it's not answering a question that they've asked you from, Schedule 1A to T, don't give them it. because they don't need it. You don't give things to the planners if you don't need to. You don't put a height on the top of the building if you don't ask for it, because you might want to adjust it a bit later when Mark wants his parapet a bit taller. You know, so don't tie things in. Take it like a planning. You know, treat it like planning. Don't give them too much because you'll be beholden to it later.
Interesting.
On the just on the early engagement point, I think Mark, you were probably alluding to it. I think the only balance to get right is, whilst we're generally supportive of early engagement, you do have that loss of competitive tension between, for us, contractors and bill prices, which I think is you have to be working with partners for them to come in early. You have to have a really good relationship and trust that they're not going to take advantage by that lack of competition and going through a formal tender process.
Building long-term partnerships, right? So, Mark, from an integrated platform perspective, which is what packaged living is, what are you finding?
So I suppose to build on what everyone said, yeah, we're involved in co-investment and seeking investment on these projects. We're involved in the development bit. I'm a civil engineer, so the development bit's my bit that I really enjoy. And then we've got an operations team as well. So we can keep that kind of circular feedback and all of those kind of small wins that we can drive into the schemes that we're doing to make them as good as we can. But there's no doubt that some of the things that the gang have talked about here, and by the way, in Mayber and with Winvic, you've got two of the foremost innovative thinkers, I think, in what's been going on with Gateway. No doubt at all. I sat with both of them very early on when it came in, and these guys were really on it, both in terms of how to engage with the whole supply chain, including the subcontracting supply chain, and on the design bit. That bit that Nick's talking about there's plenty of people who have gone out and just done a stage 4 / stage 5 design and given all of that to the building safety regulator, which is not what it's asked for and not what you want to do. So, you know, some of the things that we're learning through working together in all these different parts of the project team are really important. You know, customers want to live in a safe building, but they don't care about this stuff.
Yeah.
They don't care about the detail of this stuff. Investors want to deliver a scheme. They don't care about the detail of this stuff. The Gateway stuff has been done in a very, very clumsy way, and we're all dealing with the upshot of that and the challenges of that. And I suppose that's part of the jobs that we have, right? So, I mean, that's generally what I'm seeing across our business.
So now we need to paint a picture for people. Can we have some examples, projects? I'm looking at Mark and Cully for that, please. So who wants to pick that up?
I'll go, Cully. I suppose our involvement in a couple of schemes in Birmingham, with neighbours involved, they initially designed, we've picked those up from a planning stage. I wouldn't use the word value engineer, I'd say re-engineered the scheme to make it more viable. And when we say that, we pick up schemes at, say, 400 apartments. We've got 27 different apartment types, 17 different kitchen layouts, bathrooms that are all different. So every single ensuite's got a nuance or a nib, or that's where we sort of honed it in and taken it back to basics. Reset the grid of the structure, which also reduces carbon. The irony of that is we've introduced columns, which from an architectural point, maybe Nick will kick me, but it's about looking at the overall grid and then fitting it's like a Lego set, isn't it? If you can stack blocks one on one, it makes it very efficient in terms of drainage, layouts, everything stacks well. That means you can then look at certain offsite modular in terms of pods or utility cubs, or just picking a standard kitchen run that can be utilized across multiple apartments, which invariably, if I go to a supplier and then go, right, I'm going to order 300 of these, guaranteed you can just send me those and I can fit them into each different apartment. Funny enough, their cost generally comes down because they see the benefit in manufacturing as well. So I suppose that's where we've driven it. And classic example where Dave got involved and Cully was involved, we took Oasis, which had been struggling, and I won't go through the whole story, but it's been 5 years for me, so it's kind of scarred me for life. But we eventually got that after Liz Truss back into a position where cost inflation had gone, but we still managed to keep build cost by re-engineering the design to make it more efficient, to allow Hines to come in and actually pick a very nice spec and we managed to incorporate actually enhanced spec. But then David could actually turn around and look at his rents and actually go, well, this is more viable. This might attract a higher yield or a better yield, sorry. So that's one example in Birmingham. We have multiple others. We've worked with this team here quite a few times now to try and unlock stuff.
Cooley?
Yeah, so hopefully a good news story. But last year we were involved in a project where Pareto led and managed sort of the design process with the consultants. And we got a gateway to approval within a 13-week period. So at the time last year, that was actually the fastest in the market. I'm hoping that there's better stats out there now and people are getting 12 weeks. I'm not so sure. But I just wanted to talk to everybody about that whole process. And this is like, you know, being transparent. I think when we first assembled the team, the sort of consultants and the contracting team, last year, sort of teams were not sure what was required, you know, the level of information, because the regulator hadn't necessarily made it clear, sort of threw it back to us to say, we just want you to submit a gateway 2 submission. There's a lot of confusion of, is it REBA stage 4? Are we sending construction drawings? What are we sending? But we have to take it back to the basics of, actually, we're trying to demonstrate that our scheme is compliant. Okay, so you can demonstrate that for a REBA stage 3 through performance specification to a certain extent, you know. So it was a combination of that. The team started to work really well together and started to align, and we really got into a very good groove. We submitted our gateway to submission, and within 2 weeks, because I uploaded it, I personally got a phone call from the regulator, and I just thought, wow, because everything that we'd heard was so negative. But to get this phone call to say, thank you, I've got your submission, we are reviewing it, you'll get your Part A's and the rest of it within a 2-week period, and we did.
Wow.
And I think the difference, I think that's a good case story, because the BSR lead on that side was so regimented, and we worked well with that regulator. So we actually set out a timeline. We said, right, this is 12 weeks from the submission date, from validation, and this is what we're going to do. And by this week, minus 3 weeks from the statutory period, we've got to get your submission out to the fire consultation. But we worked so well. We got all the RFIs back, and it's so important to respond within that timely manner. They'll give you 3 days. They'll give you 5 days.
Yeah.
They don't give you a lot of time.
Tuesday, Thursday as well.
Yeah, and it's like, right, we need your response. But what was great to see, I think, from the team that we were working with, the consultants and contractors, everyone was aligned to that. So, something just, the penny just dropped, where we just all worked together to get those responses out within the time frame. And the mindset shift, and we talk about, you know, unlocking schemes. We all work together, and the mindset change. How can we unlock this? How can we make this happen? As opposed to maybe previously, you know, teams have worked in silos, but here you have to work together. And I think, to turn it on a positive spin, if anything, it's made us more innovative. It's made us think ahead and navigate our way around some of the issues and the problems that we face, because we know it's here to stay now, and there's a realism that, you know, this regulation is here. So how do we work collectively to get through this? And I think I'd like to see that as well, that collaboration that I personally experienced on that 13-week approval from the regulator side as well, because together it can work very well as long as there's commitment from both sides.
I get from what you've just said, everyone coming together is a key piece there, and understanding what to submit. My question is, do you feel that there is consistency in the way they are looking at each project to ensure that the approvals do get turned around in a timely manner?
Yeah.
Or do you think there could be a grey area there, that even if you do everything you've done now, again, I'm not trying to be negative, but I'm just asking the question, could it next time take longer, or do you think you've cracked it?
No, it's not been cracked. It's not been cracked. And yeah, absolutely, it's such a good question. Consistency. There is, unfortunately, there is no consistency. That 13-week approval was brilliant, and I think it can work because it's worked, and we've got living evidence of it happening. But subsequent submissions, whilst the validation period has greatly reduced, you're looking at a day to a week now for validations, and I am seeing that. That's consistent. But what's not consistent is when you get allocated an MDT team on the other side, they're from different, really simple things. Like maybe you get like different regions, like different fire consultations, different local fire authorities have different opinions. And I think it's a very grey area. And it really does depend on the MD team that are appointed, because whilst we have to demonstrate our competence and who we are, we don't necessarily know who the other side of the team are. I'm not sort of questioning that at all in terms of competence, but you just don't know who you're going to get. And the reviewing process is very, very different. So on a recent scheme that we've worked on, we were drilling into detail that is outside the regulation. It was very much, it's quite subjective. Example being, if somebody had a disability, they're in this car park, basement car park, how are they going to escape? But we provided the CFD modelling, we provided the escape routes, we explained how it's in line with Part B. But they said, yeah, but what if they drop their phone or they don't see the sign? That's so subjective. Yeah. But this is, and I think to make it work, we've got to get rid of that. We've got to stick to the sort of regulation and within that realms and the parameters, because otherwise we're going to be stuck.
Yeah.
And another thing that I've found, which is quite useful, and hopefully we can see a little bit more of this, is recently with the CFD modelling, which is like a sort of technical modelling demonstrating like, smoke and everything through the building and how it's controlled in a fire situation. We always recommend as Pareto to get like a third party review of that CFD model as part of your submission. And recently, the regulators come back to us to say, well, we're happy to accept your third-party review of your CFD model because we're struggling with resource and providing that resource. And I just think, well, actually, if it helps the regulator by us doing an independent review ourselves of like the structures of the fire strategy, the CFD modelling, the facade, I'm quite happy for us to do that and to submit it if it helps save the time, reduce that time from their side and get us onto site sooner. I think that we have to look at other ways to get approvals.
So you've given us a lot of really good examples there. I think we need to go deeper into the early engagement and the trust element now. So I'm going to put this back, starting with David and Mark Woodrow, around this meaningful shift, moving away from more of a transactional relationship with your supply chain to this trust where you might work with the same teams over and over again. So what have you found in your experiences recently?
Do you want me to go first?
You can go first, yeah.
We've trust and collaboration's always been there. You can't build any of these buildings, do any of the things that we're trying to achieve without that we're all trying to achieve without that. I think if we highlight one of the issues we've been talking about, one of the issues with some of the legislation that's come down the line is that we have to do more design work, which means we have to spend more money up front. And I want to concentrate what that means then for wider alignment. So one of the things that we've seen in the examples I can give is that a couple of deals that we've done in the last year or so have been aligned even with the landowner. So landowners obviously have a certain existing use kind of value, and you can't buy land for nothing. We necessarily need to get to a certain ceiling or a certain collar, in fact, on the land. And one of the ways in which we can do that is then join them in with this supply chain process as well. So it might be a subject to planning deal. It might actually be a subject to planning and funding deal, either with a private sector landowner or a public sector landowner. We've done a couple of public sector, really one leaseholder and one public sector owner in Sheffield, and the deal that we're working with in Mark, one of the things we're working with Winvic is a public sector landowner. And that's really important because then we can all align around the delivery, all of the stuff around financial close and construction close and all of those kind of commercial certainties that we need, we can all reach at that start and site process. And then actually by doing that, we can probably drive a better overall return from the project for the investors. Because as I talked about before, whilst the appetite's there, some investors have switched off the UK and the living market because the returns aren't what they want to be seeing in the world over the last couple of years. So by doing that, we can also increase that return. So I think that alignment, not just with building teams and project teams and all the way through to the customer. It's also about that alignment with the land piece, and that gets missed a lot by public sector partners, especially in planning, because they feel that there's always more to give from a development perspective, but at some point you reach a floor. And then a landowner isn't interested in being part of that deal and might sit on that site, and not everyone's a distressed type seller. So I think that alignment all the way out from the land piece is a really important bit that we've seen.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's I think generally speaking, deals are more complicated and harder to put together now. I think there's a bit around land. Take land as an example. I think there's a bit of a realization that you can look at appraisal and land could be worth next to nothing, but we all know that land is worth something. So I think if you could form partnerships with landowners, or developer landowners, and say, look, we can come in, we can get this out of the ground, but we can only commit to a price of X, but actually depending on performance over the next 5, 6 years, 3, 4, 5 years, however long it is, that there's an ability for them to take more money out of a transaction, out of a land payment or developer's profit, whatever it is. That's the way that we're trying to find a way through these transactions at the moment. And I'd say that if you then have a public sector, you have a developer who's also part of those agreements. It's not it's just not the case that you can get round, knock up a set of heads of terms, agree a deal pretty quickly. Everything starts from a position of everything's a bit challenging when it first lands, and then it's a case of which are the ones that are challenging, but you can see a route through to working and becoming viable. And then it's get the landowner, get the developer, get the contractor, get us around a table, lender, public funder, whoever it might be, get everybody around a table and say, look, we can make it work, but this is how it's going to have to work. Or this is our thinking, this is what we want to get out of it, this is what you want to get out of it. And then you kind of just kick it around a bit to try and find a deal structure that works for people. But that's not straightforward to then document. And so we've got, we've done a couple of transactions with the McLaren team. And frankly, both of those are pretty complicated, but the second one becomes a bit easier because you've already got a set of precedent documents and you kind of know each other's, what people want to get out of the transaction, where the flex is in each other's kind of, I guess, transaction making capacity and delivery capability. So I think there we are definitely wedded to working in partnership with people and trying to find a way to complex solutions, but they are taking longer. I think on the kind of the counter side to all of this is it's great working with great contractor parties, but there's also then a bit of a risk management. If we did all of our transactions with Winvic, then we'd be quite exposed to Winvic as a business. So it's kind of having a pool of trusted contractors, I would say, and developers that you can rely on, and that you have a bit of a framework, and you kind of know each other. They know our spec, all of that kind of stuff. But it's partnerships. I think you kind of need to be a little bit broader than just having kind of one or two. You need to have a bit of a stable of trusted partners, because
that pool of contractors is reducing, right? I mean, we're all aware of that, and that's the other issue that we've got here. And then there's a lot of pressure on the contractors that are left to pick up the slack, which is tough. So from Winvic, Winvic's point of view, Mark, where have you found you getting more involved in earlier collaboration, and how common do you think it is?
It's increasingly common now.
Okay.
I think with our clients and developers, and the integration with funders is changed. Where I've seen that change over the last 5 years, we've been at the table a lot earlier to understand where the contractual arrangement is. We can all design everything, but when a contract is written, and David, you mentioned there, if we know what the terms are we're entering into, we can take a view on a project as well.
Yeah.
So having that early engagement right at the table and being very open, I say, I'm not expecting all the work. And me and Mark have discussed it before, and I'll give an example. I actually turned a job down years ago.
One of ours?
One of ours. Because I said we couldn't facilitate it.
Yeah.
But I'd rather be open about where we are as a contractor and where we can take on risk, but then actually say to our partners as such, I can't do that, but I can do this here.
Yeah.
And that is also based on our supply chain.
Yeah.
As much as these guys talk, we're not expecting one contractor. I use our supply chain example. As Winvic over the years, last 25 years, we've partnered up with kind of 3 per trade to keep that risk contained. There we're having that engagement with direct owners of businesses So we can have some very open and honest conversations. We know where their financial strength is. That de-risks it from Winvic's point of view, which puts us in a great financial position. With 25 years, never had a red year. So we can sit here, which gives us then the ability and the trust to go get a performance bond, to provide a parent company guarantee, which are all of these, when we go into due diligence on jobs, there is a huge amount that the investors want in terms of ticking every single box. And that's where we can provide that level of comfort and certainty. We talk a lot about certainty in my mind. It's certainty on design, certainty on program, and buildability, where that engagement is. Even down to now, we're developing and providing more detailed cash flows, because unlocking the appraisal, where you might just put a standard S-curve in, well, that's not reality. Each different complex high-rise building can be phased in such a way, depending on what the needs are, depending on what your operational needs are. Do you want 400 units coming to market at day one when you've got a let-up process with you guys know this better than us, but this is where we're having the conversations. How many units do you want coming through? Could this job be delivered in a way that is actually 2 phases instead of 1 phase, and having all of this come on huge commercial pressure right at the end? So unlocking those discussions has been key. And that's where, as we integrate as a wider team, the whole, from early days design through to our involvement in the supply chain, through to talking to investors, developers, and the EAs and the PMs, this open collaboration, it ticks so many boxes. And that's where we can get involved very early on.
I remember that job now. The one
I
told you.
don't tell the contractor though.
I
please.
can't just build 5,000 homes in Northampton. I really like to.
But that is key for us. We deliver over 15,000 beds to date, which is a huge testament to our team. But it's knowing that we can deliver in certain places.
Yeah.
And as we expand across the country, we won't go to Wales or Scotland in a minute, but we're very prominent in the East Midlands, in Birmingham. We're now heavy in Leeds. And this outside of London, the regeneration of these cities is key. But it's also picking which are the right spots to hone your skills and look at the development of your teams as well, to bring that certainty.
Is there strength in the supply chain, your supply chain, across the country, or do you find that certain areas are better? Yeah.
No, we've had a very core supply chain in the Midlands, and when we set up multi-room, we were very risk-averse, I would say, in terms of stretching that and stretching our capabilities. But as we've grown over the years, we've also grown, our supply chain's grown with us. Yeah. It's not about changing supply chain, it's us having that conversation with them as well. Look, we're looking at a job in Bristol, we're looking in Birmingham, or we want to go to Leeds, right? Where's our strength and where's your strength? So they can also then go to there. You forget our supply chains have also got supply chains. And it's building their teams that you've got that whole trust coming through, that when I say I'm going to give you 125 weeks on the program, that I know that my painter and decorator and my plasterboarder and my M&E contractor has actually got the right set of labour. We forget on these jobs, we're upwards of 200 trades on site in terms of man hours. Wow. And logistically they're challenging. Yeah. There's no parking. I love, I mean, we build sheds, which is great. I go to those all the time and I can park everywhere. But we forget these are city centre developments. There's lots of brownfield sites that need to be unlocked. They're just complex. You get your head around it, you work on a logistics way, and it goes.
Thank you. We're getting close to audience questions in a minute, but I've got one more question that I want to check in with the funders on. How do you adapt to longer timelines and higher compliance costs? Because obviously everything's about viability again. I know I want to bring that word back up, but how is it working for you?
I think, to be honest, it's just another assumption that goes into a model, to be honest. I think we've got a benefit now that we didn't have 12 months ago, in that we have some data points on things like the gateway to, the approval period, all that kind of stuff. So costs and time is just a modelling function, and then it's just another assumption that we put in there, like it is OPEX and rents and all that stuff. I'd say what we've got now is that we've probably got quite a clear view on how risk allocation, with more on timing piece, but we've got a clearer view now on how that risk allocation should work. I think everyone's kind of alluded to it, but I don't think we're in an environment now from development opportunities that we're getting really high returns. We're struggling just to make something viable. So we spend most of our time trying to take risk out. And Mark, knowing certainty on timetable, knowing certainty on cost, all that kind of stuff, that's probably where we spend most of our time. So I think on the allocation piece, the risk allocation, we've got to be fair, but through working through DFAs and build contracts, we have quite a firm view now on where we think that a developer and a contractor can control risks. Where they can control risk, then they should take the responsibility and the risk allocation should sit with them. Where they can't control risks, or they can't control risk beyond a certain, with an educated guess within a certain allowance, that's when we start taking some of the risk alongside them. But as a funder, our job really, we don't mind developers and people making quite a lot of money out of us as long as we get our return. We're a lot more focused on downside protection than we are trying to rinse every single last penny out of a development project. So I think we price it in, and then we try and build contractual protections around that to make sure that we allocate the risk accordingly.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think 3 things I'd add. I think the land point that I mentioned earlier on, landowners need to be involved in this process. Otherwise we can't pick up sites and do deals. I think the collaboration between the teams that we're talking about here and owning risk where it's best managed, that essentially is what David's talking about, is a good point. And I think the joint venture aspect of what investors and developers have developed over the last couple of years shouldn't be overlooked. So the days of a simple, pretty vanilla, forward-funded deal where you've got a very transactional approach between someone building a scheme and someone owning a scheme, that doesn't exist now. And that's one of the reasons why we had to we wanted to build an operational platform, because that's now really important if we're going to earn our crust, not from just building the building, but also making sure the building performs and earns the right level for our co-investors, then we need to be in control of that. And so building that operational platform is really important, so you can demonstrate the success of the building, and then we can all demonstrate, the return that's being made. And all of that is just another way of talking about collaboration.
I mean, I've got lots more questions, but I've got so many people in the room. So do we have a roving mic? Just wondering whether there's, anyone would like to ask a question on anything you've heard? Don't be shy. Oh, we've got one at the back and then one here at the front. Thank you.
Hi, guys.
Would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, Rob Old from McLaren. I was just going to ask a general question, actually, about, obviously, build to rent as a market, and where it's kind of come from in the last 5 years, how you've seen it changed over the last 5 years as a product, as something that people live in and enjoy, and also where do you see it going in the future? European politics, global politics, less foreign students, all that sort of stuff coming into it. Where do you see build to rent going forwards?
It's like thanks for the question, Rob. I think we need to define what we mean by build to rent, right? And if you see it across the rental living space, there's lots of different subcategories to that, and they all ebb and flow in terms of the various influences on them. I think what we're predominantly talking about here is multifamily, which I'll come to. In the co-living space, at the moment, that product's red hot in London, and actually local authorities are starting to warm to that. So you're seeing a pickup of some of those deals. I think in the single family space, that's grown a huge amount over the last 5 or 6 years, and we've been thankfully a decent part of that, and that will continue to flow, because that is about 90% of the coverage across the country. I think in multifamily, what we're talking about here, you've probably seen the amount of places where this product works lessen from 40, 50, 60 cities and towns across the country to a smaller number, so a smaller number being viable. You've still got customers that are mad keen for the product. You've still got the buildings which are performing every day, and they're great. And whenever I go back to schemes that we built, people are clearly enjoying the product. And actually, ironically, people are learning more about multifamily, because every year goes by, the 20-something boy and girl on the street understands it's a different thing. And I've got a 29-year-old daughter, and I think if I asked her now, she wouldn't necessarily understand that. But there's plenty of people that do now understand the difference between renting in a bespoke rental building with lots of other renters versus a kind of broken PRS block. And so that's continuing to grow. So we need all of that to continue. And then we need to continue to encourage investors into the UK market to start with through stable politics and putting ourselves at our best foot forward internationally, and then to the living market by reducing legislation, reducing red tape, reducing risk. And if we can do that, then we can keep the multifamily sector bubbling away, and we can continue to deliver the great product that it's delivering at the moment.
Want to come in?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting question. I think it's one that you could talk for quite a long time on. I think the two things that I would say is that the UK is quite a specific market in the sense that it has a massive over-reliance. The rental sector has a massive reliance on private buy-to-let landlords, non-institutional landlords. And we've seen through tax changes in 2017, EPC changes, and now the Renters Reform Act, there are a lot of sales in the buy-to-let space. And we're not building enough of institutional ownership, institutional owned residential assets to compensate for that. Let alone put the 1.5 million homes aside, we're not catching up with what we're losing in the market at the moment. So I think there's the supply. We're losing supply quicker than we're replacing it. I think if we just from a Heimstaden perspective, I guess we have a lot of people that have come to the UK market, a lot of operators, investors from the UK market have been probably a bit more North American focused in their approach. And I think having time spent in a European business, it's very different. So we've got, I don't know, let's say we've got 3,500 residential buildings across the entire group's portfolio. Currently, only one of those assets has any amenity space. And that's one of our schemes up in Edinburgh. Everything else is non-amenitized, no staff. I think when you look at the amenitized stuff, you've got quite a stretched affordability metrics on rents and some of those schemes because you have higher OPEX costs and so you've got to drive higher rents to maintain profitability. I think the other element of those buildings is that when you come to liquidity on some of those buildings has probably become a bit more challenging because of where cap values are per square foot when you take yields and NOI. And so I think, and we think, that actually I think the market will evolve towards a less amenitized product and towards more of the European way of doing it. I think if you are going to own residential buildings for the next 20, 30 years, you want to know that you're always tapping into the widest demand pool in your target city. And I think you do that by being in that mid-market space.
Thank you. I think we had a question at the front. Yeah, go ahead.
David, just picking up on your point actually about OPEX.
Mm-hmm.
How are you looking to change that modelling? I guess answer the question a little bit. Long-term partnership. Do you think that's going to be a massive in terms of the one and done, in and out kind of approach, rather than kind of we're here to stay and we want to manage that market going forward?
Yeah, you can't run buildings efficiently without a big portfolio. You know, if you've got a chief operating officer on a portfolio, you know, the more assets they manage, the more that their cost is diluted against each asset, so the more profitable each asset becomes. So I think that the UK market has struggled with scale. You know, we're probably close to 75% as an operating margin now, but that's on 157,000 units in the Heimstaden business. So it's a, you know, you do need scale to be able to do it well. I think we're trying to build scale and put it all together. So we're currently at about 8,000 units across 3 portfolios that we've got in the UK. One of them's Heimstaden and 2 of them are under the Heim platform. But we want to try and scale that to about 20,000 homes because that's where we think that we will start becoming more efficient. I think on the capex point, it's quite easy to when you're flicking around in a model, it's quite easy to just chuck in a bit more capex and say, right, well, increase a bit more amenity space, we'll charge a bit more rents. In reality, you might need another cleaner, you need other people that are then going to run this building, and you need the staff, and that's where really the OPEX hurts. It's the staffing cost that really in the budget that's the main cost driver. So when we look at things, I think there's an element of balance. I think the European some people in Manchester, London, Bristol, Leeds, Birmingham, they want some amenity space in the building. They want some co-working space. They want a good gym. But we tend to focus on just those 2. I think when buildings start getting into the realms of cinema rooms, private dining rooms, that might not be that well used. For us, we see that more as a cost drain, and that cost drain comes on the OPEX. And if you're capitalising whatever it is as another person's salary because you've got to clean it every day, at 4.5%, then it starts to have quite a big impact on value. So I think scale and trying to avoid things that are non-essential costs, that's where I think the OPEX needs to get to in the UK.
What about in areas where there might be a surplus, perhaps, of build to rent now, and then you're competing with others?
Yeah.
How do you then look at that and say, right, how do we differentiate ourselves?
I don't think you need to differentiate yourselves. I think there's this mentality that you've got to do something bigger and shinier and have better amenity, but all you're doing is just making that product in that particular time more expensive. So I think that we want to deliver really high quality buildings with a high quality amenity offering, but it can be high quality and not have loads of it. You could spend, like with Mark, we actually redesigned Oasis to bring down the level of amenity. We didn't change our budget because we want to do a really good job on what we've got, but we're doing it on less space, so you can, you do a better job, and you don't suffer the OPEX costs. I think in terms of going into cities, I think there are two things with that. I think you could look at Birmingham and Leeds, which may be the two cities that people are talking about generally as being a bit oversupplied. No one's committing to any buildings right now in those cities. So maybe if you are delivering a scheme in Birmingham and Leeds now, you might be a little bit nervous that there's a lot of supply coming through. I think that probably Leeds is maybe 6 months ahead of where Birmingham is currently. I think Birmingham's probably a bit in the eye of the storm in terms of having quite a lot of supply delivered in a short period of time. But we're going to be delivering our building in 29, 30. There aren't many schemes. Again, it comes back to that lack of viability. Everything happens in cycles. Now it's just a time when nobody's committing to new developments.
Yeah.
So I think it needs a period of certain markets being unviable, just so that markets can absorb the stock, a bit of household growth, and then it will be good to go again in, I'll say that. Maybe it won't be, who knows, but kind of 29, 30. Yeah. But you've got to focus on, don't think you've got to chase the top rent and the best amenity in all those buildings. You've just got to be an affordable rent that you can stay in for the long term if you're in it for long-term returns, and make sure that your building's high quality and it's efficiently designed.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think I wouldn't necessarily talk about a surplus of, we're not at that stage. We're still a fairly nascent idea compared to the States. And if you look at, we're just coming around again to revisit some of the cities we've developed in before, and if I take Milton Keynes for instance, we're challenged with that quite a lot about the amount of stock. Well, 20 schemes might have planning, 3 might be delivered. That might be 1,500 homes in effectively a conurbation of 250,000 people. I mean, it's just not. It's not even a reality. Even in places that were leading on this in somewhere like Manchester, I don't think that's the reality. I think you need to have a good building. I think it needs to perform well. I think it needs to be managed really well. One of the things that I'd say to your question, Neil, as well, we need to understand the value of good property management versus asset management. So in the States, asset management and property management is put together. The people who want a career in that are seeing both of that. They're seeing the value side and they're seeing the organizational kind of operational side. In this country, we tend to see asset management and we see property management, and unfortunately that has a negative effect on the quality of property management that we have and that we deliver in this country, mainly because it's just not apportioned the right level of value within what we're all doing. And so that's something that slowly it has started to evolve. It needs to keep evolving, because that's a really important point in terms of these buildings earning their keep every day and keeping the customers.
You think that AI is going to have a big impact on that?
Yeah, I think that's probably, when we look at our business, okay, there's a bit of, you might be using a bit of AI on appraisals and Excel, and there's maybe bits in development, although it's not quite so relevant. In operations, I think that's the most relevant area of that vertically integrated bit, where I think that does have a big effect, and a really big positive effect, without being a negative on the customer. But if you can see kind of customer input, triage a lot of that, make sure that's divided into making that process really efficient through AI, in terms of just thinking about just picking one area of comms, for instance, then I think that does make a big difference. I think there's a real potential there.
That's how we should have answered Neil's question. That's how we should have answered Neil's question.
You're right. We'll go again in a minute.
One.
Okay, we've literally got 1 minute left. Does anyone have a burning question before we say thank you to our panelists, please?
Question 21. How is that
I'll take your Colleen. I think it's getting easier. Going back to Cully's points on the BSR, we're in a much better world. Andy Rowe and Charlie Pugsley have now taken over. They call it the Innovation Group, which I always laugh at because they've now got some proper staff.
That's innovative.
That's the innovation. But it's moved on from where it was with the HSC, and there's an active push to have the collaboration, as Cully said there. We've seen a mixture of our Gateway 2 applications, and it comes down to the individuals. But I hope going forward with that the individuals, the CLC guidance has put a lot in place now in terms of what documents are expecting. There's a few nuances in there that I think we can change as a contractor, as a design team. I would like to see more of a regularized competency. Even if you were to have a competency statement signed off on a yearly basis as a tier 1 contractor, same for a designer, because as we go through this, we've got a scheme at the minute where we've had that competency statement commended on 2 other jobs. On the next job, it's too long. That's where the inconsistency in terms of regulatory sort of element is. I think the whole process has moved on fantastically, and as Nick said earlier, we've learned over the years now that actually less is more. They are only looking for certain elements. You don't need to coordinate and dimension absolutely every detail on the drawing, so you can start to rein back the element of the REBA Stage 4 design and actually engage with them to see what they actually want. That MDT procurement has got a lot better, and that early engagement from their side has meant the real fundamental questions that the BSR is there for a reason. Going back to Grenfell, should never happen. We're all there for this new legislation. But it goes back to the important questions, the CFD modelling, the fire strategy. Is the structure right? That's the key components. They do not care about if that partition's aligned here. And if they get that sorted with the MDT as they are, you can hone in on those questions early on. And that's what Hackett and everyone else wanted. And that's what we need to get back to. If that goes hand in hand with having more stuff signed off on say you're audited on a yearly basis, it will allow us to work quicker and give more certainty to the program as well. And likewise, they will have more confidence actually just being able to review the design. So they need to review the whole, if you've got a standard change control, mandatory occurrence reporting, why do they need to review that on every single job that you put in?
I totally agree with that. I think that what we're all trying to achieve is the right thing. Safety, we need to improve safety after Grenfell, but we've done it in the wrong way. We've effectively taken the expertise out of project teams, we've put it in something separate, run by central government, and then we've asked project teams to spend a year designing the building and then send that in a Pickford's van to these people who have no chance of understanding that, right? They really don't, because they'd have to... sitting around the table for a year, you're struggling to understand all the complexities of that, and then we give it to these guys and they go, well, I don't really understand that. Of course they do, and it's made the process, in my view, less safe, right? Which is not what it was trying to do. What it was trying to do was make it safer, bring it back into project teams, have a best practice, have a better understanding of who the building regulations officers are, have a better process for driving through best practice, but don't take it away from project teams because it's nonsense and it makes this thing less safe. Yeah.
I'm going to have to round it up, guys. It's a fantastic conversation. My final remarks will be that we started off with collaboration, but we actually had 3 more C's: certainty, confidence, and capability. So please give everyone a round of applause. Thank you so much.